This week, there are no excuses for the New York Mets. They need to win, and they need to win big.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at JustBaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. If there was ever a team that needed a day off, it was the New York Mets on Monday. An absolutely brutal road trip that was capped by an awful series in Seattle. Now it's time to flush that series and move ahead because this team has a great opportunity here to make something out of this season and to actually be a playoff team. There's 7 weeks left. There's 44 games. And after the Braves won a 1-0 game against the Giants on Monday night, the Mets are only a game back. They did drop half a game clearly, but they're right there. And they still have a series left against the Braves. So if it is a two-horse race, they really got to make sure that they match the Braves' pace from here on out to potentially beat them in that series and put themselves in position at the end of the season to make the playoffs. This is going to be a really tough stretch, just overall, okay? It's a playoff push. It's not supposed to be easy. And we'll see what the Mets are made of because they've been two very different teams this year. There's the team that we watched that went on that great run after they started the season 0-5 and got right back into the race. Francisco Alvarez goes down. The Mets go through a 6-week slump as they really struggled, particularly throughout the entire month of May. They figure it out. They have an amazing June, an amazing July, get through the trade deadline, and since, they have not been playing great baseball. Not terrible. They've been keeping their head about above water, but they have not been the same dominant team that was the best in baseball for a few months. And ahead of them, you have a Padres and a Diamondbacks team that seem to have figured it out. The Mets are 5 games back from both of them. You have a Cardinals and a Giants team that are 2.5 games back. Either one of those teams could make a run. But the Mets have to just worry about themselves. And this is a week where you got to win baseball games. Every week you do. But this is arguably the easiest week left in the schedule for the New York Mets. I'm going to run through it, right? 7 weeks left. Like I said, this week, A's and Marlins at home. 2 teams that are below 500. Next week, Orioles at home, and then you go for a 4-gamer in San Diego. It's a pretty brutal week. Following week, you have the Diamondbacks, going to be a tough series. Then you got the White Sox. Not a horrible week, but the Diamondbacks are going to be a tough team to beat. You then come home, you got Red Sox, Reds. Reds aren't the best team, but Red Sox certainly have had a really good season. Then you have Blue Jays and Phillies on the road. Phillies makes that a pretty tough week. You then come home, Nationals and the Phillies. So that's going to be a stretch across a 2-week span where you're really going to have to go up against what's been a giant in your division this year. Then you close the season where hopefully the Mets are still in the race against the Braves and the Brewers. They do not have a cakewalk by any stretch to close out their season. But if they get there, at least the Mets will have kept us engaged for an entire season. And as much as I want to see the Mets make the playoffs, for me, that's the bigger thing. I want to wake up going into that final week of the season and still be believing in this Mets team that they're going to get to October. And if it doesn't work out, I'll at least commend them for a hard-fought marathon. And this week is the beginning of that final leg. You can't drop the ball against the A's and the Marlins. You just can't. There's no excuses this week. Last week, there was plenty of excuses, and I spoke a lot of them into my microphone here, especially during that Mariners series. But even when they lost a game to the Rockies or against the Angels, and we talked about the travel and all these different things. Well, now you're home. You had a day off, and you got two bad baseball teams coming to town. With that said, the Oakland Athletics might be a little bit of a trap. They're not just a bad baseball team. You look at the record, right? The Oakland Athletics this year are 50-69. They are 19 games under 500. But if you look at the split of their season, there was a stretch in May and June where they played 23 games under 500. The rest of the season, they've been better than 500. In April, they were 13-14, and they've been playing their best baseball since the calendar turned to July when they were 15-9, and this month they're 5-4. Now, you look at the series splits across that span, right? Since July, they've played in 11 series. They have won 7 of them. They've split 1, and they've lost 3 series. Now, how does that break down? How have the A's stacked so many wins? Look at their opponents during this span, who they beat. They beat the Angels 3 times. So that's the big thing for them. The Angels have just been their punching bag, and they swept them twice. So that carries a lot of weight in that record that they've had since July. But they also beat the Phillies and they beat the Astros during this stretch. Over their past 2 series, they beat the White Sox and the Blue Jays, 2 bad teams. But they're rolling right now. Now, the series that they lost, they did come at the hand of some good teams, the Dodgers, the Red Sox, and the Orioles. I'm not going to say the A's can't be beat. The Mets are a much better team on paper than the Oakland Athletics. But the A's absolutely can beat you. We've seen the Angels beat the Mets in the series. We obviously saw what the Mariners did. But we've seen other bad teams like the Marlins this year find their way to beat the Mets in a series. And those are the most frustrating ones. So this first series is a tougher test than you would expect. But as I'm going to get into the next segment, there is still no excuse for the New York Mets to not find their way to beat the A's and put themselves in position for a great week with a struggling Marlins team coming to town. And that's a whole other thing. We'll talk about it this weekend because, man, put the 1999 Yankees in front of me or the Marlins in September, and I don't know who I'd rather see the Mets play because, and it's not September, but you get the point. The spoiler Marlins, always a frustrating one. Hey, I guess the bright side, this will be the last time the Mets see the Marlins this season. So at least you close the book on that one this weekend. But the A's are first and foremost. What I want to talk about in the next segment again is some reasons why the Mets should win this series. I'll get into where the A's have a lot of strengths, and I'll also talk about where the Mets have to be better. So I'll go through all of that in just a minute. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Ibotta. It's summertime, which means it's barbecue season. Stock up on all of your grilling favorites and earn cash back on every purchase when you use Ibotta. Ibotta is a free app that gives you the most cash back every time you shop on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies and more. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. This will cover the cost of an entire shopping trip. Other apps give you points that don't amount to much. With Ibotta, just add your offers in the app, upload your receipt, and you get real cash back that you can cash out to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. Join the over 50 million savers and earn cash back every time you shop from over 2,700 brands and retailers, including Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. And right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONMLB when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back. And use that code LOCKEDONMLB. That's Ibotta, Ibotta, in the Google Play or App Store, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. As summertime is winding down, we get less games, and the sports just aren't sportsing like I want them to, but FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want because all I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Paul Blackburn's been striking out more batters since he came over to the Mets, and he'll be facing off against his former team tonight. Maybe you want to look at Paul Blackburn in a same-game parlay with the Mets winning. Might take over strikeouts for Blackburn. Maybe you want to look at Francisco Lindor getting multiple hits. You can find all of that over at FanDuel. And again, they're hooking up customers all summer long with a boost or a bonus daily. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports by checking out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. Now, if the New York Mets are going to win this series, what they have to do is jump out to some early leads against the Oakland Athletics. That's where they can win. If they win the early part of the game, they're going to fare really well. And obviously, that is pretty commonplace in any baseball game. You get out to an early lead, you stand a better chance to win, duh. But against the Oakland Athletics, it's more important because if you look at the strength of their team, when it comes to the pitching, it's clearly the bullpen. They do not have a good starting rotation, but since the All-Star break, their bullpen has a 3.18 ERA. That is sixth best in all of baseball. Hogan, Harris, and Mason Miller have not given up a run between the two of them. And Mason Miller is one of the nastiest closers in baseball. Spent some time on the injured list. He's been back. He's still been throwing the ball well since coming back. And it's very similar to when we saw Ben Joyce take the ball for the Angels in the beginning of that road trip, that tight game. And Ben Joyce comes on for a 4-out save, and he's throwing 105 miles per hour. Mason Miller is a similar experience where he's got a disgusting fastball slider combination and good luck hitting them. So if the A's have a lead late, you're probably screwed. So the Mets have to avoid getting into that position. They have to win these games early because that bullpen is really good. And the Athletics have a good lineup. Okay? Since the All-Star break in particular, Brent Rooker and Lawrence Butler have been on another planet. These guys have been great. And that extends back to July when I know at Just Baseball, we had both Brent Rooker and Lawrence Butler in our top three. We do players of the month each month. We have like a medal stand graphic that goes up. There's a gold medal player, there's a silver medal player, and then a bronze. And I can't remember. I think it was Rooker was our gold medal guy, and then Butler was bronze. But the bottom line is we've had, or those two guys in particular have been getting some recognition lately because of how good they've been, and that has continued into August. So you have two hitters to really fear. You have J.J. Bleday, who's been really good since the All-Star break as well. He's got a 920 OPS. So the three of them all above 920 when it comes to the OPS. And Daz Cameron, since the All-Star break, has a 963 OPS. Now, he particularly plays against left-handed pitching. He's a lefty masher, but the Mets are going to roll out two lefties in this series. So you're going to see that collection of four hitters that can be really dangerous. And Shane Langoliers is right there with them, one of the better offensive catchers in baseball. He's got an 830 OPS since the All-Star break. So they can score and they can hold down leads. You got to win these games early, and that's where the Mets have a big advantage. Game one, the A's have not announced a starter, but the expectation would be that Ross Stripling is going to take the ball. Stripling is 2-11 on the season. He's got a 5.72 ERA and 72 and a third innings pitched with only 40 strikeouts. Paul Blackburn's going to pitch against him, and of course, Blackburn came from Oakland, so we'll see what type of industry knowledge they have. Can they make Blackburn look bad? He's been really good in his first two starts. Granted, he's pitched against the Angels and the Rockies. Now, he pitched against the Rockies at Coors, and we've seen that lineup have some real ignitability to it. So I still believe in Blackburn, but that's going to be a really critical matchup for the Mets to win that early part of the game, to get out to a lead, and hopefully your bullpen can hold it down. You got Mitch Spence pitching for Oakland in game two. Got a 4.33 ERA in the season versus David Peterson. Peterson has been getting a lot of run support when he starts, so hopefully that continues. And then you got Joey Estes pitching the final game against Jose Quintana. Estes has a 4.70 ERA. The Mets have to score runs in this series. They got to get this lineup back on track, and that's really where we need to see some changes. Whether you're mixing up the lineup, doing whatever you can, you got to find some answers here. To me, Jeff McNeil should be batting second. That's the first thing that I want to put out there. That's the way that I would try to spark this lineup because guess what? Since the All-Star break, Jeff McNeil has been the best hitter on this team. Which is so absurd considering what he did in the first half. But he's hitting 324, 358 on base, 662 slug, OPS over 1,000. No one else in the Mets is over 900. So he's the one guy who's really swinging it. He's leading the team with 7 doubles. leading the team with 6 home runs, tied with Pete Alonso. He's got 14 RBIs, which is just one less than Francisco Lindor and JD Martinez for the team lead. And he scored the most runs with 16. Jeff McNeil should be batting second behind Francisco Lindor, in my opinion. We'll see if the Mets go to that. But I would just stack your best 2 hitters right now and see what happens. Pete Alonso, granted, has an 866 OPS since the break. He has not been as bad as it seems because when he's gotten up in a big spot, oftentimes he's not coming through. He also has 30 strikeouts and 84 at-bats. That's pretty brutal. So it's been very feast or famine for Alonso. Look, I've said it before. I'll say it again. This could be it for Pete Alonso in a Mets uniform. So show up and show support for him. Hopefully the Mets can rally around him, and hopefully Pete Alonso can deliver. Because as much as fans want to look at him now and say he's horrible in the clutch, that's not who he had been prior to this season. He had been a good hitter with runners in scoring position in the past. If you get Alonso back into that rhythm, and also JD Martinez as well, because JD Martinez, since the All-Star break, has a 694 OPS, but he's swinging a little better lately. I've seen some encouraging at-bats from him. If those 2 guys start to hit, and let's say you slide Jeff McNeil in the 2-hole with Francisco Lindor, and that's your top 4, and maybe you bump Nimmo down to 5th in the lineup, honestly, I wouldn't even mind bumping Nimmo all the way down. Bat him 9th. Make it a double leadoff situation. Have him bat in front of Francisco Lindor. I think that could help him, and not for the rest of the season. You need Brandon Nimmo to hit if you're going to win, but maybe for a week or 2 until you get him going. Then you bring him back up if Jeff McNeil struggles or someone else. I think the Mets are at the point where they should be making some drastic shifts to their lineup, trying to find a combination that works, similar to when they slid Nimmo down to the 2-hole originally with Lindor batting, or actually was sliding Nimmo up into the 2-hole after having him bat 3rd, flipping places with Lindor. Lindor leadoff has been a great thing for this team. They still haven't found that sweet spot for Nimmo. Maybe he's batting 5th. Maybe he's the protection for Pete Alonso. I don't know. We'll see what happens here. But they have to figure out this lineup. Jesse Winker's got to come through as well. He was the big deadline addition. They need to see some production there. And getting something from their backstops is going to be huge as well because they've gotten next to nothing from their catchers since the All-Star break. Torrens has been a little bit better than Alvarez did in 267. Francisco Alvarez has been just brutal. He's hitting 179 since the break. He's got an OPS under 500. So there's a lot of areas for improvement for this Mets team. But this is a series to get right on with the starting pitching you're going to face. You just went up against Miller and Gilbert and Castillo. Now you're going up against Stripling, Estes, and who was the third one? Mitch Spence. You got to find a way to beat up on bad starting pitching, not just in this series, but also in the next one. This is a week the Mets have to dominate. You got to go out this week and win 5 games. Just do it. This is the time. 44 games left in the season. How many wins are the Mets going to need to make it into the postseason this year? Typically, you need at least 86 in this wild card format. I mean, last year, actually, the Diamondbacks made it with 84, but I would say general rule of thumb, get to 86 wins. If that's the case, in 44 games, the Mets need to win 25 of them. You go out, you win 5 this week. All right, 20 left to go. Makes it a lot easier. Got to win this week. Hopefully the Mets can figure out a combination that works. They can shake off that road trip and put themselves in a really good position when they have a great team coming to town to close off this road trip in the Orioles, and then they hit the road for one of their more important road trips of this season against the Padres and the Diamondbacks. This is a pivotal homestand. There's only 3 left. So if you haven't caught a Mets game yet this year, go out, show your support, cheer on this team. They're going to need the help. So we'll see what happens with this. In the final segment of the show today, I will be talking a little more Mets athletics, but I was on the Locked On MLB podcast today. We did a crossover. Paul Francis Sullivan, the host of Locked On MLB, has also stepped in to host Locked On A's this year. So he's got a lot of insight there, and we did a series preview on that show that I thought would be good to include at the end of the show today. We didn't get into as much of the numbers as I've broken down in this segment, but he still talks about how the A's have been playing. They go back and forth a little bit. So I will play that for you to close out the show. First things first, though, another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. Get supplies from the site that's made for skilled trades, supplyhouse.com. Supplyhouse.com is a reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online with their easy-to-use website that is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help get the job done right. Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business. Talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining Supply House's free Trade Master program, where every trade master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at supplyhouse.com/T-M and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at supplyhouse.com.
Now, this seems kind of weird to tell you to tune in to Locked On MLB, but you know what? Because if you're listening to me right now, you're listening to Locked On MLB, but maybe you're listening to Locked On Mets. I don't know. Check me out. I'm your pal Sully. I'm here all week long, 5 episodes a week of Locked On MLB. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. However, if you really like what I'm doing, guess what you should also do? Check out Locked On A's, because I'm hosting Locked On A's 5 days. That's right. If you like what I'm doing, guess what? You have 10 episodes a week of your pal Sully hosting here at the Locked On Podcast Network. Even if you're not an A's fan, we're doing some fun things there. It's the last season in Oakland, and it's weird. I have an upcoming episode where I go to all the spots where they propose to build stadiums in the Bay Area. And guess what? There are no new stadiums in any of those places. And you could have checked me out going to Sacramento, where I sat basically on the surface of the sun in a July afternoon game, where it was so hot that my phone overheated while trying to record a podcast. So check us out, Locked On MLB, Locked On A's. Check out Ryan's show at Locked On Mets. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. All right, so we're crossing over right now, Locked On A's, Locked On Mets, and Locked On MLB. Everyone's hearing this right now. The A's started, obviously the A's are a weird team this year. They were horrific. They were grotesque in May and June. And then they were the best team in the American League in July. And they remain a good team after winning that series in Toronto. Brent Rooker can homer at will. And they still, and Mason Miller is back from the injured list. No one traded him. They still can pitch. They still can hit. So if Met fans were circling in the A's series saying, well, there's 3 easy wins right there, you might be surprised. What is your thoughts as the A's seem to be relishing playing the spoiler, beating teams like Philadelphia and Houston recently? What are your thoughts and concerns about the Mets and A's series coming up?
It's funny, I for Just Baseball and the managing editor, I just assigned a story today talking about the best spoilers down the stretch, and the A's were the first team that came to mind because they have been playing great baseball. And there's nothing worse than going into a series against a team that's playing good but has nothing to lose. And I think Mets fans experienced that last week when the Angels took a series, when the Rockies really pushed the Mets. And I said after the Mets won the second game of that series, after they lost the first one, I was like, man, just get them out of Colorado. I'd almost want to see a good team because maybe the Mets play up to competition instead of down to competition. Then I met the Mariners over the weekend. I think I'm happy that we're not going to watch Logan Gilbert, Luis Castillo, all those great pitchers in this series. I think the Mets have an easier task ahead than what they just went through, but it's not just a cakewalk by any stretch. It's not what's going to be the weekend series against the Marlins. This is definitely the tougher of the 2 series, but it doesn't get any easier after this. The Mets have to win this week because they got the Orioles coming next week to close out their homestand. And then they have maybe their most important road trip of the season going out to face the Padres and the Diamondbacks. So there's no time to lose series. They have to find a way to beat the A's, but that's not as easy as you would think if you just looked at the total season record.
Well, it's been following the A's all year. And Brent Rooker, how he did make the All-Star team, I have absolutely no idea. And I like the fact, obviously I've been following the A's the whole season, but I've liked the fact that they didn't do a total fire sale. They did trade. They made the deal with the Mets. They traded Urseg to Kansas City. They made a couple of deals, but they kept Andujar. They kept Rooker. They didn't trade Miller. They didn't trade Estes and some of their other pitchers who have been pitching well. They basically said, no, let's and Rooker was relieved. Rooker didn't want to be traded. And by the way, here's a message to all the people, the people who comment and things like that. What, does he not want to be on a winner? What does he not want to do with this? First of all, brush the Cheetos off your chest. All right. And maybe, just maybe, it's not exactly convenient to up and move at a heartbeat, sometimes across the country in the middle of a season. But in the case of Brent Rooker, he didn't want to be traded because he revived his career with the A's. He was a DFA dude. He couldn't find a job with Minnesota. He became an all-star caliber pitcher, and he wanted to be part of the A's as they, for the organization that basically rescued his career. He wanted to be there at the end of this weird year, to be at the final games in Oakland. He would say, hey, this team turned it around for me. I don't want to be traded in midseason so I can be a rental player in Philadelphia or wherever. So if you've not been in that position, kindly shutteth uppeth, all right? You know, it's like they just should be, it's a pain in the butt to move in midseason. Maybe he has a sense of loyalty. There's no loyalty in baseball. He was loyal. No, he's a loser. No, you're on your fifth, French bread pizza, and you're calling him a loser? Come on, just continue playing Farmville or whatever, and shut up. I got no deal. But okay, back to reality. I think this is going to be the A's are playing with a certain swagger, and they're having fun. Lawrence Butler. I don't know if you know who Lawrence Butler is. Lawrence Butler's been hitting the snot out of the ball, and he's been playing like a poor man's Kenny Lofton, basically. Sparky at the top of the order, going first to third. They still have holes. This team's probably going to finish with 90-something losses, but even 90-something losses will be a 20-game improvement from last year. Go Sacramento. But anyway, I think that if Met fans are only half paying attention and they think this is the 110 some odd loss team from last year, they're going to be in for a rude awakening when Rooker homers.
Yeah, no, the A's, they have a much better team, and I think their direction was sort of interesting, right? Because everyone, said, all right, we'll sell all. Why not sell everything you can? But at the same time, if you still have pieces that have control, you could build towards something. That front office is still trying to win baseball games and looking at next year and beyond. Well,
maybe.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Fine. Well, for the sake of argument, yes.
I mean, I'm just saying they have to be doing something, right? They can't just because the ownership has given up until they get to Vegas doesn't mean that the front office has. And so it makes some sense to me that they kept Rooker. And ultimately for him too, I would say that, he has a chance here to finish off a great season in Oakland, and then he might be an attractive trade chip in the off season where he can start a year with a club from the beginning as a big piece of what they're doing. But yeah, this is a A's team that is definitely a lot better than, again, the total record would suggest. And it's not going to be easy. At the same time, this is a series. If you want to be a playoff team, the Mets got to win it. They got to find a way to put some runs on the board. And I think the fact that they had such a rough series in Seattle, to me, coming back home, I feel like they are going to get going a little bit offensively. It's just a matter of if the pitching can hold up, and we'll see how that ends up working out against an A's lineup that's swinging it really well. That's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Thank you for tuning in. If you want to catch the full conversation with myself and Sully again, you can find that over at Locked On MLB. And make sure you tune into tomorrow's show as I'll break down game 1 of this series. I also want to touch on some prospect notes because Carson Bench has made his professional debut. We'll go through that a little bit. The Mets first-round pick finally getting on the field in a Mets uniform, and much, much more. If you're listening on the audio side today, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. I got a goal to get to 10,000 subs by the end of the season, so I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen or your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today with your local experts from each team and our league-wide experts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.